Chapter 5, Goony Bird, Greene. On Tuesday, all of the children, including Felicia Ann, arrived at school early. Even Malcolm, who had never been early before. Tricia had a flower in her hair. Ben was wearing a vest. Kiko had a tiny bit of pink lipstick on her lips. And Barry Tuckerman was wearing a polka dot tie. "Good morning, class," Mrs. Pigeon said. "Don't you all look nice today?" "You do too, Mrs. Pigeon," the children said, and Mrs. Pigeon blushed. "Well," she said, "I thought I'd wear my new shoes today." Usually Mrs. Pigeon wore soft, comfortable shoes, but today she was wearing very shiny, high-heeled shoes with gold buckles. The principal, Mr. Leroy, made an announcement on the intercom. He announced a bake sale and a birthday and a meeting of the crossing guards. A fifth grade boy read a poem about Christopher Columbus over the intercom. Everyone in the school said the Pledge of Allegiance together. Then it was time for school to begin. But Goony Bird wasn't there. "Well," Mrs. Pigeon said, "let's take out our social studies books, class. Let's turn to the chapter called Cities." "But Goony Bird isn't here," Nicholas called. "No," Mrs. Pigeon said, "she isn't. She seems to be absent today. Maybe she has the chicken pox." The class was silent. The room seemed sad. The lights seemed dim. Even the gerbils, who usually scurried noisily around in their cage, were very subdued. George Washington, in his portrait on the wall, looked as if he might cry any minute. Slowly the children took out their social studies books from their desks and turned to the chapter called Cities. Kiko began to cry very quietly. "I don't want to do social studies," she whimpered. "I feel too sad." Malcolm crawled under his desk and curled up in a ball. Suddenly, the door to the room burst open. "It's Goony Bird!" everybody called. The lights seemed to brighten. The gerbils began to run in a circle, and George Washington seemed to smile. Goony Bird was out of breath. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said. "I am never, ever late for anything. I always set 3 alarm clocks, and I lay out my clothes the night before, and I even put toothpaste on my toothbrush before I go to bed so I can brush my teeth quickly in the morning. But today..." "Wait," she said, "I have to catch my breath." She stood in front of the class and took a few deep breaths. "Whew, there," she said, "I'm fine now." She smoothed her red hair, which was flying about, and tucked it behind her ears. Today, Goony Bird was wearing gray sweatpants, a sleeveless white blouse with lace on the collar, and amazing black gloves that came up above her elbows. "This morning," she explained, "I quite unexpectedly had to direct an orchestra." "An orchestra?" asked Mrs. Pigeon. "Yes, a symphony orchestra." Mrs. Pigeon smiled. "I hear all sorts of interesting excuses for tardiness, but I have never heard that one before." "I believe I'm unique," Goony Bird said. "Yes, you are indeed. Did you wear your gloves when you were directing the orchestra?" "Yes," said Goony Bird. "As a matter of fact, I did. I found them very helpful." All of the second graders had their hands in the air and were pretending to lead orchestras. Even Malcolm was back in his seat, using 2 pencils as orchestra batons. Goony Bird headed toward her desk. She looked around at the other children's open books. "I see we're in the middle of social studies," she said. Mrs. Pigeon slipped one foot out of a high-heeled shoe and rubbed it with her hand. Then she put her shoe back on. "Actually," she said, "I think the class would appreciate it if we held story time a little early today." "Yay!" called all the children, and they closed up their social studies books. A Goony Bird story? Goony Bird asked. Yes, said Mrs. Pigeon. Yes, called all the children. Goony Bird smoothed her long gloves. She went back up to the front of the room. Which one would you like today? She asked. How Catman was consumed by a cow? I'd certainly like to hear about Catman and the cow sometime, Mrs. Pigeon said. Maybe tomorrow? But this morning, I'd like to hear one called Why Goony Bird Was Late for School Because She Had to Direct a Symphony Orchestra. Oh, Goony Bird said. All right, I could tell that. And it will be absolutely true? Asked Mrs. Pigeon. Of course, Goony Bird said. Have you forgotten? All of my stories are absolutely true. Then she curtsied and began. Why Goony Bird was late for school because she was directing a symphony orchestra. Once upon a time, in fact it was just this morning, Goony Bird Greene got up and got dressed in the clothes that she had carefully laid out the night before. She ate her breakfast, brushed her teeth with her pre-pasted toothbrush, gathered up her homework, put on her elbow-length gloves, and started off to the Water Tower Elementary School. Goony Bird interrupted herself. She explained to the teacher and the class, sometimes stories start in the most ordinary way. Then they become exciting when something unexpected happens. Don't you find that to be true? The children nodded, thinking about their favorite stories, like Where the Wild Things Are, Ben suggested. Or Little Red Riding Hood, Beanie said, When the wolf appears and you don't expect it. Oh, I'm so scared of the wolf, Kiko whispered loudly. Every time the wolf appears, shh, the children said. Goony Bird continued. Goony Bird walked down Park Street and turned the corner onto Walnut Street. And when she was halfway down Walnut Street, halfway to school, suddenly, she paused. I've explained before, she said, about the word suddenly. It makes things exciting. Sometimes, class, if you're creating a story and you get stuck, just say the word suddenly, and you won't have any trouble continuing at all. What a good idea, Mrs. Pigeon said. We should start a list called Writing Tips. What happened suddenly on Walnut Street, Goony Bird? Goony Bird continued. Suddenly, she saw an enormous red and white bus coming very slowly. Each window had a head in it. The bus was quite full of people. Goony Bird was amazed. Even though she had lived in Water Tower only a short time, about a week, she knew that the town of Water Tower did not have enormous red and white buses. Water Tower had 2 medium-sized yellow school buses. Goony Bird knew. And she knew also that one of the Water Tower churches had a small white bus, really a long van, that had a rainbow painted on it and said, Jesus is Lord on the side. But an enormous red and white bus was completely new to Water Tower. As Goony Bird watched, it moved very, very slowly down Walnut Street. She could see that the driver, though he was steering carefully, was also trying to look at a map in his hands. The bus driver saw Goony Bird, and he beeped his horn a very little beep. He pulled the bus to a stop with a breathy sound of brakes. Then he pushed the handle that opened the folding door. Excuse me, the bus driver said. You look as if you're on your way to school. Yes, I am, Goony Bird replied, and I certainly don't want to be late. I am never, ever late. The bus driver looked as if he might begin to cry. I feel exactly the same way, he said. I am never, ever late. But this morning, I have a terrible problem. He held up his unfolded map. Do you need help folding the map? Goony Bird asked. It is hard to fold a map, but I find if you follow the creases very carefully, No, the bus driver said. My problem is that I'm lost. Oh dear, Goony Bird said. And the bus driver continued, we are going to be late for a concert. A concert? Yes, I have an entire symphony orchestra on the bus. Goony Bird paused. Questions about orchestras, she asked. Class? Barry Tuckerman was waving his hand wildly. We know all the parts of an orchestra. We listened to a young person's guide to the orchestra. Winds, Ben called. Strings, Tricia called. She pretended to play an imaginary violin. Brass, Chelsea called. She tried to make a trombone noise, not very successfully. Percussion, said Malcolm loudly, and he began to tap his two pencils in rhythm on his desktop. And also, Barry called out, his hands still waving, we listened to Peter and the Wolf. Oh, said Kiko in a small voice, I hate when the wolf comes. Every time the wolf appears, Shh, the children said. Goony Bird continued. So Goony Bird climbed up the steps and got on the bus. Every seat was filled. There were men and women in the bus, all of them dressed in black. All the men were wearing black turtleneck shirts. The women were all wearing long black skirts. They definitely looked like an orchestra, but they looked very distressed. Where are you supposed to go, Goony Bird asked the driver. To the town hall auditorium, he said. We are supposed to play a concert there this morning. He looked at his watch. It begins in 20 minutes, he said in a worried voice. I will get you there, Goony Bird said. The bus driver called to the orchestra players. This wonderful girl is going to direct us, he said. Yay, the orchestra players all called. Luckily, even though she had lived in Water Tower for only a week, Goony Bird knew exactly where the town hall auditorium was because her father had pointed it out when they drove around the town. There is the hospital, her father had said. Go there if you happen to see a bank robber on the loose. And there is the town hall auditorium, her father had said. Go there if you want to see a ballet or concert. Start the bus, Goony Bird told the driver, and turn right at the very next corner. It was a good thing that she was wearing her long black gloves. When she pointed, everyone could see her long black pointing finger. There was no place for Goony Bird to sit down, and we all know that it is dangerous to stand while a bus is going. But she had no choice. She stood beside the driver and held on to the side of his seat. He promised to drive very, very carefully. Next, turn left, Goony Bird said and pointed. And there we are, she told him. See that large brick building? That is the town hall auditorium. Yay, the orchestra players called again. The women began to comb their hair. Thank you for directing us, they all said to Goony Bird as they got out of the bus. The driver had opened the luggage compartment and was lifting out cellos. You will be late to school, one man said as he picked up a large black case. Trombone, he explained. Yes, I will, Goony Bird said. I will be tardy. Is there some way that we can thank you for leading our orchestra, he asked. Goony Bird thought for a moment. Finally, she thought of a way, and she whispered it to the trombone player. He nodded. Yes, he said, we will do that. One by one, the musicians thanked Goony Bird. She said goodbye and hurried down the street to Water Tower Elementary School. She arrived at school just as the class was about to read cities in their social studies books. The end. Questions, anyone? Goony Bird asked. Was there a drum player? Malcolm asked. Yes, Goony Bird said. Every single part of a symphony orchestra was there, even a harp. Oh, said Malcolm, sighing. I wish I could have seen the drum player. I love drums. You will, Goony Bird said. Was there a flute player? Chelsea asked. 2, Goony Bird said. I wish I could hear the flute players, Chelsea said. You will, Goony Bird said. I have a question for Goony Bird, Miss Pigeon said. What was it that you whispered to the trombone player? Secret, Goony Bird said, but you'll find out at 12 o'clock sharp. That's lunchtime, Mrs. Pigeon pointed out. Precisely, Goony Bird said. Now, shall we turn to our social studies? All morning, the children, and Mrs. Pigeon too, glanced again and again at the big clock on the wall. They did social studies and arithmetic and had a snack in the middle of the morning. Then they did reading and art. Finally, just as the clock hands moved to 12 o'clock and the second graders were about to reach for their lunch boxes, Goony Bird announced, "Here they are!" She pointed to the large windows on the side of the classroom. The children all stood up and watched through the windows as a red and white bus pulled up and parked. When the door of the bus opened, the orchestra players came out one by one, holding their instruments. They arranged themselves in a semicircle on the lawn, facing the Water Tower Elementary School. The conductor, holding a baton, stepped to the center and lifted his arms. Too bad he doesn't have long black gloves, Goony Bird murmured. Mrs. Pigeon opened the windows so that they could hear better. The orchestra began to play a slow, stately melody. When it was finished, the conductor bowed. Then he turned to the windows and explained. That was a saraband. It's a kind of dance. We'll play it one more time in honor of Goony Bird Greene. So the orchestra played the short saraband again, and the children danced around the classroom in a very serious and graceful way.